Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, September the 20th, 2023. Today, I want a change of scene. I have talked about Russell Brand and politics, and today I want to look at the astrology of a missing child. And I would like to thank Don Atheist 13 for suggesting that I look at the case of Summer Wells. I'd never heard of her before yesterday, and she is a child who went missing on I think June the 15th, 2021. I think she was 5 years old at the time, and apparently it's a big case. So I do want to look at that. So thank you, Don Atheist 13. I would also like to thank Age of Aquarius Tarot for backing up Don Atheist 13. Age of Aquarius Tarot suggested that I'm only really interested in politics, or perhaps politics is my preference. Yeah, maybe I talk too much about politics. Maybe I don't know as much about politics as I seem to claim. Well, I don't really know much about politics. Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about it, but that doesn't really mean much. So yes, I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the case of Summer Wells. So I just want to look at a website which describes the case. And this obviously I will be looking at today's astrology very soon, but just first I want to just give you some background about the case of Summer Wells. So here we go. Okay, so here it is. Here's the case. So this website is uncovered.com. I assume it deals with cold cases and things like that. So here's the child. Her name is Summer Moon Utah Wells. And so as far as the details are concerned, the disappearance of Summer Wells, a 5-year-old girl from Rogersville, Tennessee, has captured the attention of the nation since June the 15th, 2021. As the case remains unsolved, the community and the nation continue to search for answers. So Summer Wells was born on February the 4th, 2016, so we have a birth date for her. Obviously not a birth time, but it's better than nothing. She was the youngest of 5 siblings and lived in the rural community of Beech Creek, part of Hawkins County, Tennessee. So timeline of events on June 15th, 2021. So late afternoon, Summer's mother realizes she is missing and alerts her husband, who contacts the police. And in the evening, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation issues an endangered child alert, upgraded to an Amber Alert. So as far as theories are concerned, this website gives 3 theories. One is a kidnapping. I suppose she lives in a rural community, so it might be relatively easy to do that kind of thing. Number 2 is an accident. Yes, she could have had an accident, but presumably there's been exhaustive searches, so if there had been an accident, she would have been found, I would have thought. And 3, family involvement. So that's the case. I'm not making any claims that I'm going to say anything amazing about it. I'm most certainly not. When I started looking at the charts, I really didn't think I was going to come up with anything useful, and that's what I don't think. I don't think I'm going to say anything great here, but it might be useful in terms of showing you the way my mind works. What charts I'm looking at when I try to work out what's going on. I mean, the 3 charts that I'm looking at. Firstly, her birth chart. She was born on, February the 4th, 2016. Secondly, there's a chart for when she was reported as missing. I mean, I've looked at numerous sources and it seems to be 6:30 p.m. One source said that 6:30 p.m. was the last time she was seen, but most sources are saying around 6:30 p.m. was when she was actually reported missing. The third chart I'm going to look at is a horary, which is the chart when I ask the question, what happened to Summer Wells? This is a very subjective chart. It's the chart of my question, where I am here when I ask the question, when I ask that question, and I'm absolutely not saying that this horary is going to be of any use. I mean, it does have the horary, as I will show you in this video, it does have a signature, I think, of a missing child. But whether or not we can tell anything useful from it, I'm not entirely convinced. But anyway, to begin with, in this video, I want to talk about what's happening today. It being September the 20th, 2023. So here is the chart for today. It's Wednesday. This chart, as usual, is set for noon in New York. So you can see that the moon is in Sagittarius. And the moon goes into Sagittarius today at 6 minutes past 3 in the afternoon in London. So that means that if you're in Europe, the last part of the day, late afternoon, evening, the moon will be in Sagittarius. First part of the day, the moon will be in Scorpio. If you're in Asia, and particularly Australia, New Zealand, then you're not going to see much of the moon in Sagittarius. In fact, you're not going to see any of it if you're in Australia and New Zealand. So, as always, you do have to consider time zones when you listen to my reports for the day, and I do try to keep in touch with time zones, but it can be difficult. Now, if you're in the United States, and if you're on the East Coast, then the moon goes into Sagittarius at 6 minutes past 10 in the morning. If you're on the West Coast, it goes in at 6 minutes past 7 in the morning. So really, in the United States, pretty much for all of a useful day, the moon is going to be in Sagittarius. So this changeover from Scorpio to Sagittarius, on the face of it, is quite major, and it's probably quite good, at least on the face of it. You know, the moon in Scorpio is not well placed because the moon is it's fallen in Scorpio. You know, the moon in Scorpio can be quite brooding, emotional, but really keeping its feelings to itself. And then it goes into Sagittarius, completely different. Moon moves from a water sign to a fire sign. There's more optimism, more action, more energy. We've got more to say. We can reach out for new horizons, all of that kind of stuff. But the trouble is that the moment the moon moves into Sagittarius, there you can see moon moving into Sagittarius, it makes a square aspect to Saturn. And that moon square Saturn can really squelch it. So we might go, we might be really keen to express ourselves, and then suddenly we hit a brick wall. Someone tells us, no, that's not the right thing to do, or the circumstances might not be right, or we immediately get criticized. Now, this may be a good thing in certain situations. So if we're tempted to say something outrageous, we might have second thoughts. That Saturn may not come from outside, it may come from within us. It's our sort of our inner policeman, perhaps, or I suppose what would Freudians would talk about in Freudian perspective. Maybe it's the superego. We know, is it superego, ego? whatever, superego, we're told, no, you can't do that. That's not acceptable behavior. So because of that Saturn, the transition from Scorpio to Sagittarius, at least externally, may not be as dramatic as it sounds. But still, Moon going into Scorpio to Sagittarius, in terms of how we are, we're going to be less focused on our feelings and sort of more focused on our sort of dynamic energy, our intuitive understanding of what we should be doing and the way the world is going and how we want to interact with it. So that's pretty much the main feature today. As far as relationships are concerned, the hypothetical planet Cupido, which is kind of a sort of, it's like a dimension of Venus. Cupido is often connected with unions and marriages, is on the Venus-Uranus midpoint. So with Cupido opposition to Venus-Uranus midpoint, I mean, this chart doesn't actually show Cupido, but Cupido was the first hypothetical planet that Alfred Witte, the founder of the Hamburg School, discovered, as he would put it, using reverse engineering, I think, of Russian artillery barrages on the Eastern Front during the First World War. I think that was how he worked out where Cupido was, or supposedly was. But Cupido is not really to do with artillery barrages. It's to do with unions. It's to do with love. And with Cupido on the Venus-Uranus midpoint, there may be a sudden meeting. Suddenly we come together with someone. Now, that might not be just romantic. It could be about business. It could be friendship or something like that. But we must look out for that. Suddenly we realize we have a rapport with someone, and we can form some kind of union. Although a few people might experience a sudden marriage proposal, because Cupido is a planet connected with marriage. But I'm not saying that's going to happen. That would be an extreme interpretation of Cupido on the Venus-Uranus midpoint. So now I want to look at what's going on for the 12 signs of the zodiac. So here we go. These are my star sign forecasts for today, which is Wednesday, September the 20th, 2023. Aries, you don't like being told what to do, and you feel that some people are taking themselves too seriously. And perhaps it's connected with a misuse of authority, people thinking they can do what they like because they have the support of a higher power. But once you get some distance, you'll see the whole thing in a new perspective. Taurus, in some ways, it's a good idea to keep moving. When you're in one place for too long, the emotional temperature starts to rise and there is a general feeling of discomfort. But if you are moving from place to place, then the air keeps circulating and you have the freedom which right now is very important to you. Gemini, a change of scene or a change of friends doesn't necessarily change anything. People are strongly influenced by the outside environment, and with the moon making a stressful aspect to Saturn, that's the moon square Saturn I was talking about, there could be a feeling of stagnation. For your part, just focus on your own core interests, and then most of the irritants should disappear. Cancer, you expect things to be done in a particular way, and people making mistakes are unlikely to be forgiven, at least in the short term. However, some of your demands might be unreasonable, and you need to consider your reputation. So work out what's possible, and if you really want something, you should probably just get it for yourself and not rely too much on other people. Leo, it's important not to have expectations. You might feel that you can start doing things your way, but as the pressure starts to ease, it starts to return. Contradictory as that might sound. But some of that pressure might come from you yourself. Perhaps you're being too self-conscious. Elsewhere, close relationships could cramp your style. Virgo, just because somewhere is familiar doesn't mean that it is life-affirming. And today, the places that you know best could be the places that hold you back. And much of it is connected with the personalities involved. People exercising a controlling influence or taking you for granted. As far as you're concerned, what matters most is you being in control. Libra, there's no room for sloppiness. If you're going to do something, you need to do it properly, and attention to detail is going to be vital. Not just because mistakes could be costly, but also because mistakes could be noticed. And what seems to be a short journey, or perhaps just a short visit, could take far longer than expected. Scorpio, ideas are brewing, and you're working out how to put them into action. While the ideas themselves might be sound, right now there probably isn't the structure or the backing to guarantee success. And when you look at the financial side of things, it does seem that a lot more work is required. Sagittarius, the moon is moving into your star sign. In a general sense, this is a good thing. In yourself, you're going to be in tune with the world, and you'll be ready to go out and make things happen. But there will be things in your way, and you have to work out how best to deal with them. For example, people telling you you've got it wrong. Should you listen to them? I don't know. I suppose it depends on the situation. Capricorn, you've got a lot of influence, even though it's not immediately obvious. If you say something, people will listen, and if you want to stop something happening, you probably really can have an important impact. And matters are helped by your effective use of words. But just because you can grind things to a standstill doesn't mean you should. Aquarius, you can see that the world is far from perfect, and you're starting to concentrate on particular aspects of this imperfection. If only these things could be changed, things could be so much better. And while you can create small changes, your success and failure depends on how you conduct yourself. Sensitivity matters. Pisces, you're moving into a strong position, and you may actually be ready for new responsibilities. It might not feel like it as you grapple with the world and its complications, but you actually have a firm grasp on external realities. But if you want to make the most of available opportunities, you have to be tough, especially in terms of career and business. So what I'm going to do now is turn to the I Ching. As always, I threw 3 coins in the air, and I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 52, keeping still. So the advice here is just do nothing. Okay, that doesn't mean do nothing as in being completely lazy. It just means just centering ourselves. You know, the world out there is complicated, and you know, there's a lot to take on board, and we don't have to jump in. We don't have to immediately get involved with everything. We can just stop, work out what's going on. And you know, if we're being pushed to take some kind of action, we don't have to do it. There's no pressure, or okay, there might be pressure. We don't have to act. It's best to to keep still. But that's going to be difficult. The Wilhelm translation of the I Ching, in terms of this second line, the second line moves. So what it does is it talks about a situation where we're being carried along by circumstances out of our control. It gives the imagery of we want to stop, but our legs keep moving. And because we want to stop and our legs keep moving, we fall over. I suppose it's like running down a hill. We're trying to stop, but our legs are just, completely out of control. So we must try our hardest not to get carried along. We should be keeping still, but it's going to be tough because, circumstances are going to just push us along, and we don't want to slip. If we follow the crowd, we could slip up. And then, having gone through that, it's kind of the opposite when circumstances seem to be trying to force us to keep still. We need to keep still because that's what we want to do. We don't want to keep still because we're being told to keep still. So that might be another thing that might happen. We've been forced to move. Now we're forced to keep still. So we're getting messed around here. We're being pushed in one direction, pushed in that direction. We really need to center ourselves. We don't want to get involved. But centering ourselves is going to be difficult. And then we move to the second hexagram. Perhaps this relates to what happens if we don't center ourselves, where we're heading, if we just go with the flow. And if we go with the flow, we hit this one. Hexagram number 4, youthful folly. Now, youthful folly is kind of an interesting hexagram because in the I Ching, it's often used to say you should not be asking the I Ching. The I Ching is just telling you to go away. That's what youthful folly can mean. I Ching often says, I've told you the answer once, I've told you the answer twice, why are you asking me again? Why are you wasting my time? So, given I've already asked the question, what's this all about? Well, youthful folly is just about stupidity in general. By the end of the day, we could find ourselves being pushed into a situation which is really stupid. We could do something which is completely unwise. And worse still, we'll know it's unwise, but we'll just follow the crowd. So really think about that. Just look at the pressure you're under, and also look at what you might suddenly want to do. If you suddenly decide you want to do something, remember, this actually fits with the astrology because we've got the moon in Scorpio, then the moon goes into Sagittarius. So when the moon goes into Sagittarius, kind of depends where you are. Okay, if you're in Australia, New Zealand, this isn't really your issue. But, if afternoon in Europe, pretty much all day in America, when the moon goes into Sagittarius, that's the temptation. I don't want to keep still with the moon in Sagittarius. I kept still with the moon in Scorpio. Now the moon is in Sagittarius. I want to go and do stuff. But then the moon in Sagittarius hits that square to Saturn. And that's where things come apart. And that's the youthful folly. So just be reserved. Don't rush into things. I think that's what the I Ching is telling us. That's what the I Ching is warning us. Okay, so I want to move to the astrology and look at the case of Summer Wells. And, I'm just warning you here, don't expect me to say anything particularly profound here. I'm just going through the charts, just see what I can find. So let's go. So I suppose the starting point would be Summer Wells herself. I should say, this is just astrology. I should almost say it's like for entertainment purposes only. I mean, I don't want to upset anyone with this. I mean, it's just a view. I'm not saying but it's not really entertainment, worrying about a missing child. But this is her horoscope. I've set it for February the 4th, 2016. I don't have her time of birth. I've set this for Memphis, Tennessee. It because I don't have a time of birth. I'm sure she wasn't born in Memphis, Tennessee. It's just it doesn't matter because I don't have a time of birth. I could set it for anywhere in Tennessee, anywhere in eastern United States, and it would be a similar chart. So we don't know where her moon is. For moon is in 26 Sagittarius. She probably has a moon in Sagittarius, all things being equal, unless she was born in the evening. Moon in Sagittarius, I suppose you might think Moon in Sagittarius is a child who likes to wander, maybe. I mean, but I wouldn't read too much into that. Looking at a child's chart, I was told when I was doing astrology lessons in the 80s, the teacher basically was saying we shouldn't. You need to let children be themselves, and there was actually advice from one teacher not to spend too long looking at children's horoscopes. I think that was fair advice. Okay, we see Sun. She's Sun in Aquarius. Now, I take the view that in a female chart, the girl starts off as her sun sign, and she kind of really gets into her moon sign, when she becomes an adult, and it's a reverse with boys. They start off with their moon sign, and then they sort of grow into their sun sign. I mean, that might be a sort of controversial thing, but I think Sun in Aquarius, I suppose this girl is quite, all things being equal, quite sort of independent-minded. And that Sun is sextile Uranus, square Mars. So she does what she wants to do, I would have thought. So I suppose if you wanted to come up with some theory that maybe she might have walked off, I suppose you could see that in the chart. Although we don't have a time of birth, and I wouldn't read too much into that. And Sun square Mars, though, is of course problematic because it's quite violent. Sun square Mars. These are two male planets in 90-degree aspect to each other. So there is something potentially, I suppose, sinister about this aspect between Sun and Mars. So that could be problematic in this chart, but we're talking about a disappearance. I'm kind of of the view that just looking at her plain natal chart on its own is not tremendously useful, and it might be better to look at the chart for when she disappeared. So here we do have an exact time. So this is a disappearance chart. I've set this chart June the 15th, 2021, 6:30 p.m. Now 6:30 p.m. is the chart when she was reported missing. So we might want to just look at this chart, in isolation, not in relationship to her horoscope. What's going on in this chart? The moon is quite close to the midheaven. The moon is void of course, conjunct the midheaven. Not conjunct the midheaven, but fairly close to the midheaven. It's at the top of the chart. So really, perhaps that's what the chart is about. Moon, that's the child, perhaps. Moon going nowhere. I don't know. Now, if you are into Chiron, then we start to see something really interesting. But you might be into Chiron, but possibly if you're into Chiron, you're not into semi-squares and sesquiquadrates. But the moon is at 2733 Leo is exactly sesquiquadrate Chiron at 1233 Aries. You know, they are exactly 135 degrees apart. To my mind, that does indicate a wound regarding children, moon sesquiquadrate Chiron. Now, I understand that she would have been missing for some time before that, but this is, in a sense, reporting her disappearance is a time when it's real, when it's moved from just, looking around the house, looking around the community, when you actually contact the authorities. Moon sesquiquadrate Chiron. This is what it's about. This is what the call to the authorities is about. It's a missing child. It's a wound. Chiron is in the Chiron is in the fifth house. So I think that fits very well. Now, as far as other things going on in this chart, there are other things. Pluto is Pluto. You can see there's Pluto. There's the sun. There's the moon. Pluto is widely making a quincunx, an 150-degree aspect to the sun. It's sort of widely making a quincunx to the moon, but it is exactly on the sun-moon midpoint. It's exactly opposition the sun-moon midpoint. So, when you've got a planet on the sun-moon midpoint, it tells you all about the day, all about what's going on. Pluto and the disappearance of a child. Pluto can certainly be about disappearances. In terms of Greek mythology, you've got the Persephone myth. Persephone was this figure in Greek mythology who she ate 6 pomegranate seeds, and she had to spend 6 months of the year in the underworld. And so Pluto on the sun-moon midpoint, in terms of a disappearance, that certainly fits. So that's an important point to make. There's other stuff going on. There is an almost exact Saturn-Uranus square. So Uranus was at 1310 Taurus. Saturn was at 13.5 Aquarius. Now, obviously, this Saturn-Uranus square would have been around for a few days, and everyone in the world would have experienced it. So, in a way, it's not personal. But what we might want to do is consider how that Saturn-Uranus square impacts the horoscope of Summer Wells, and that's something I will do shortly. And then the Sun is square Neptune. The Sun is just separating from. The Sun is sextile Neptune. It's square. Neptune's at 2310 Pisces. Sun is at 25.2 Gemini. Well, that's Sun square Neptune. If you wanted to try to interpret that Sun square Neptune in terms of what's going on with Summer World, if you wanted to interpret it, you might put quite a negative interpretation on that, because you'd say, well, 6:30 was when she was reported missing. So if she was missing before 6:30, the Sun square Neptune is telling us what has recently happened. And in terms of the child, I mean, we've got, where is the child in the chart? Well, okay, the child could be the moon. I mean, that makes sense. The moon is void. The child is not moving any further. The moon has made its last aspect. The moon's last aspect its last major aspect was a sextile to the sun. So the moon is separating from a sextile to the sun. The sun is, I'm afraid, the sun is on the 8th house cusp. So there is an association, sun on the 8th house cusp. I suppose you could associate that with death. Aries is on the 5th house cusp. So you could say, well, is Mars the ruler of the 5th? Well, or by exaltation, I mean, the sun is exalted in Aries. So you could say that the sun has a connection with the 5th. And the sun is moving to, has moved from a square, is moving away from a square to Neptune, which would not put a particularly optimistic interpretation on that chart. Although I think that the most important thing in this chart is it's got to be that moon in Leo. I mean, it sort of dominates the chart, and it's square the ascendant. It's what it's all about, and it's sesquiquadrate Chiron. Now, in terms of how these aspects hit, how they affect Summer Wells's horoscope, there are some midpoints to consider. Saturn and Neptune are aspecting Summer Wells's Hades node midpoint. Saturn and Uranus. This Saturn and Uranus are hitting her Hades node midpoint. The Hades node midpoint, you could say, is about connections with bad people. That's one way of interpreting, because node is about connections. Hades is about people who are, low life, criminality, and so forth. So if it's hitting her node Hades midpoint, when that might be difficult. I mean, I just read what Alfred Vitter's Rules for Planetary Pictures says about this. So, looking at the node Hades midpoint, he says of this is Saturn and Uranus. So Saturn on the node Hades midpoint is to be tied to hostile people, loss by theft, or because of poor company. That's one possibility. And then Uranus on the node Hades midpoint, suddenly connected with evil things, to be present at accidents or murder. So that is a very negative way of looking at this chart. As far as I suppose the actual transits to the transits that Summer Wells was having, I've just looked at some of them. The main one I sort of noticed was that Venus at the time was at 1620 Cancer, so it was opposition her Pluto quite closely. Now, normally Pluto is it's a collective planet, generational planet. An aspect to your Pluto should not be a particularly big deal. Her Pluto is sextile Mars, and so you might think, well, sextile Mars, is that a fortunate aspect? Normally, Pluto sextile Mars is quite a good aspect, but Venus is opposition her Pluto, so it may simply be triggering her Pluto. So then, I don't know. I think that was the main obvious aspect that was there, and on the face of it, that aspect is as I said, it's not particularly dramatic. I want to one other thing I probably should look at is lunations. That's when you're doing a chart, you should look at the new moons and full moons or before someone was born. Now I haven't actually looked at the new moon or full moon before she was born. So that's just something the new moon or full moon, not before she was born, before the disappearance, and how it affected her chart. So that's the disappearance chart. So if we want to look at to see if there was anything interesting in the new or full moon. So 5 days before she was born, 5 days before the disappearance, there was a new moon. You can see at 1947 Gemini. It's square Neptune. I would not, and it's kind of tied up with Mercury as well. So the question is, does that new moon have any impact? Does it do anything at 1947? So going back to her 1947 Gemini. Okay. That new moon, it makes a quincunx to her Mercury, but that new moon made a quincunx to her Mercury. I 150-degree aspect to her Mercury, but I don't think that lunation really tells us a great deal. And one final chart I want to look at is the chart of the horary I asked. So this is something with a missing person. You always do. You ask a horary, so I asked the question myself. I asked this question. You can see I asked it on September the 18th, 2023, at 5:37 p.m. where I'm living. What I found disturbing about this horary is just the position of Venus. Just Venus is on the 7th house cusp. The 7th house cusp in astrology is, it's not just about relationships. It is kind of a bit unfortunate, the 7th house cusp. It suggests to me that, she's not, she's possibly not in a great place with Venus exactly on the 7th. If you're on the ascendant, you're out there, or on the midheaven, you're out there in view. But on the descendant, on the IC, It's more hidden. Also in this chart, you'll notice it's a via combustor. I asked when the moon was in the via combustor. Moon is in Scorpio. The moon in Scorpio, when you got a moon in Scorpio in a via combustor, you could expect something unexpected to happen. Something that you really weren't planning on. So that's what happens with moon in Scorpio, and the moon is applying to a square of Venus, and so that aspect, you can see that it's got about 6 degrees to run. So 6 degrees, you could say, well, in maybe 6 years or 6 months or probably more like 6 months. Maybe in 6 months' time, the case will be solved one way or another. The authorities will know what happened to her. Now, that could be in 6 years' time, because, 6 something. So the case is going to get solved with the moon going to a square of Venus. But I don't want to sort of say for sure how that case is going to be solved. I think looking at these charts overall, as I said right at the beginning of this video, I'm not saying that I'm going to come up with anything particularly wonderful. When you have a case like this, I suppose usually, as I understand it, it doesn't end well. I don't like the fact that Venus is on the 7th house cusp. I think also the Saturn Uranus hitting her Hades node midpoint, does indicate that something bad happened, and maybe in 6 points. Whether that's 6 days, years, weeks. My hunch would be probably 6 months. Could be 6 years, but there's that moon square Venus. That's and because the moon, if you look at the moon, it's right at the top of the chart. Like in terms of being square the ascendant, it's actually in the another thing I should say, house system is really important here, particularly in a case like this. If you use whole signs, the moon would be in the 9th house, moving into the 10th house almost. But in terms of the house system I am using, when I do horaries, I don't use Placidus. I actually use the Regiomontanus house system. Reason being because when I learnt this aspect of this type of astrology, I was using the system of William Lilly. He was a 17th century astrologer working in London. He used the Regiomontanus house cusps. And so in terms of Regiomontanus, the moon is in the 8th house. It doesn't look as if it's in the 8th house, but it is in the 8th house. There is the cusp of the 9th, and the moon is 7 degrees, nearly 7 degrees short of the 9th, almost in the 9th, but I would kind of treat it in the 8th. And of course, the 8th house is the house of death, which doesn't give a particularly positive spin on it. I mean, does the moon have a connection with her? Well, we're asking about a child. The ruler of the 5th is Mercury. Mercury is in the 7th. You could say, well, perhaps in the power of someone. But Cancer is a co-ruler of the 5th, because So the moon could, again, the moon is perhaps a child. Moon is in the eighth house, and that's obviously not good, and it's moving to the square of Venus. Um, but please don't read too much into this. I'm just looking at charts. You probably have to have a different view from me. So anyway, those are some charts relating to summer wells. I would like to thank again Don Atheist 13 and Age of Aquarius Tarot for pushing me into looking at these charts. I hope you found this of some use. It's not necessarily my my interpretations that matter. It's perhaps the way I'm just looking at these charts, and possibly someone else would have a more insightful view of these charts, or they might come up with a better horary, or they might be more inspired to ask the question in a different way. But anyway, I hope you found that useful, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.